Hi, thank you so much for being here and coming out on this rainy night for this important discussion. I'm Judith Mowry. In my day job, I'm the Interim Deputy Director of the Office of Equity and Human Rights, and I am always happy to facilitate meetings with the community because I miss the community. So I'm here to help out tonight. And it's
recording in progress.
Thank you. It's just going to be sort of the regular rules of the road that we all know in meetings. You know, we really want to have a productive conversation tonight. And so the agenda, which we will go through, but we're going to hear from Stephanie Howard from the mayor's office, and she's going to scope out why we're here together. And we want to hear from everybody, so we may, shorten your time. Going to ask people to try to stay on point. We're going to go through each point that the letter from the PAC pulled out at a time, and we'll have discussion after each one, okay? So just being respectful, being conscious of how much airtime you're taking up, and being willing to work with me when I need you to do something. Is everybody okay with all those ground rules? Yay, okay, thank you. Well, I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie Howard from the mayor's office.
Thanks, Judith. Good evening, everyone. Really appreciate you all coming down in person, and we appreciate seeing those of you online who are joining us tonight. I just wanted to give a couple of statements just about kind of how we're here, why we're here tonight, and what our hope is for this evening. As all of you know, City Council heard a revised code package from the PAC's proposal on November 15th. And at that meeting, it was very clear and clearly articulated by the former members of the PAC that you wanted to have a public meeting with all of us to discuss that. And we appreciated that very much. We're here to do that. So that's what we're here to do tonight. I will apologize in advance because the timeline that the DOJ settlement agreement set for us made that a push to get things through, and it's not ideal. So I'm really appreciative of the time that you're taking now, and we are maintaining public comment beyond tonight to stay open until December 15th to try to accommodate that as best we can. So tonight, as Judith said, what we're going to do is to walk through a letter that we received from several of the former PAC members that articulated specific questions about the revised code package, and we want to do our best to answer all the questions that you have. And so with that, I think the only other thing I'll say is that we do have a hard stop at 8 o'clock tonight, but again, we will continue to receive public comment until December 15th. So we'll do our best to get all your questions addressed tonight, but if we don't, we still want to hear from you. So with that, I think I'll do some introductions, or we'll start. As Judith said, my name's Stephanie Howard, and I'm with the mayor's office. I'll hand it over to Heidi.
All right. Good evening, everyone. I'm Heidi Brown. I'm with the city attorney's office. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm really happy to be here with all of you and appreciate folks taking time to come in person, and then also for folks online. Look forward to the discussion. Lisa?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Lisa Rogers. I'm a deputy attorney in the city attorney's office. I use she, her pronouns, and I just echo the appreciation that's been communicated by Heidi and Stephanie so far.
Hi, Darian Jones. I use he, they pronouns. I'm the Senior Policy Director for Arts, Culture, and Equity for Commissioner Ryan. I've been working on this project for a little over 2.5 years and excited to be here with you all tonight.
And hello, everyone. My name is Jackson Paul, joining from Commissioner Mingus Mapps' office. My pronouns are he, him, and I advise the Commissioner on policy matters surrounding transportation and public safety. Thanks so much for having us here.
Good evening. My name is Grace Zarpak, and I'm a policy advisor for Commissioner Renee Gonzalez. I use she, her pronouns, and like everyone else has said, thank you for being here. I started working on this in January when my boss was elected.
Good evening, everybody. Angela Rico, she, her, ella pronouns, and I work with Commissioner Carmen Rubio as her senior policy advisor on public safety, and I'm also a liaison with Prosper Portland, one of our bureaus. Happy to be here.
All right. We did put in some community guideline slides. Did you move past those already?
I did, but
okay,
I can
that's
back
fine.
up.
Whatever you like, Julia.
I think we covered those, basically.
Well, then we can just,
Sorry, I forgot about the slides.
yeah. All right, we'll just jump right into the first question from the PAC's letter. And that was, could we produce a flow chart of the system in the proposed code? And so we were able to send a copy of that to the folks who'd sent a letter, and then we have copies here tonight as well that we can circulate that shows the flow of a complaint through the system under the revised code. We have that here as well on the slide if you want to move forward. There we
There
go.
we
So I might ask if you would mind walking through this flow chart.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. All right, so the flow chart, we start off with a complaint. Any complaint, and this is one of the questions, so I'll just answer it now. Any complaint that comes in regarding a concern about police conduct will go to the Oversight Office for Community Police Accountability, the OCPA or office. So we'll refer to this by the acronym. And just to orient everybody and for folks who are online, so we have the board, which can be called the CBPA, the Community-Based Police Accountability, and then the OCPA, that's the office. So all complaints would come into the office, which is similar to the current process where the Independent Police Review currently receives all complaints of concerns regarding police conduct. From there, an office investigator who does the intake will take information from the complainant, and they can get as much information as possible. If the allegation is something that, assuming everything that the person said is true, would violate a policy or bureau directive, police bureau directive, then the matter proceeds to investigation. So you're going off to the left on this spreadsheet, or flow chart rather, excuse me. If we assume all the facts are true, but that would not violate a city policy or a police bureau directive, then it goes off to the right. In addition, there are many types of allegations that are under the board's jurisdiction, and some that are not and would still go through internal affairs. And so if it's one that would go through internal affairs instead of to the community-based police accountability board, then it will go off to the right-hand side as well. If at that point, I'm going to go down the side of the investigation does not proceed. So either the facts, which all are assumed to be true, do not violate policy, or secondly, it's not within their jurisdiction, then a notice gets sent out to the complainant, and through that, the complainant has a right to appeal that decision not to proceed. So maybe they feel you didn't understand all the information I provided, you didn't hear everything I had to say, I have additional information, I think your understanding of my facts are incorrect and it actually does violate policy, I just need to give you more information. However, whatever reason they disagree with what the investigator says, they can appeal that to the director, who then can review that decision, consider whatever other information the complainant wants to provide, and then they'll make that decision of whether or not it, assuming all the facts are true, is that a policy violation? At that point, if the investigation is still not going to proceed because it's not a violation of policy, even assuming everything's true, then at that point, offering voluntary mediation, one of the things the PAC had recommended. And so from there, once mediation is offered, the matter is closed. If on the other hand, the OCPA director, the office director, disagrees with the investigator and says, no, I've read over everything, I've read what the complainant provided, and I disagree with you, investigator, this, we're assuming it all true, it does violate policy, then they send it over to the other side. So it's that appeal process provides them with that opportunity to have additional information considered. If you assume they're all true, so from there, we're going to go to the left-hand side of this flow chart. Assuming the facts are all true, it would violate policy. Then we're off to the left-hand side. and it's within the board's jurisdiction. From there, a complaint navigator is appointed. The complaint navigator can be appointed sooner if the board decides they want to adopt a rule to appoint somebody earlier, or maybe they want to just delegate that authority to the office director and have the director decide at what point, maybe sooner. We just said no later than the point at which you've decided to proceed with an investigation. You must appoint a complaint navigator. And for anybody who doesn't know, the complaint navigator is somebody who's there for the complainant and helps walk them through the process, provides support to them, answers questions to them about what is all this and how does it work. At the same time, then, notice is sent out to the police chief that the office has opened an investigation into one of the police bureau employees who's covered by this. The investigation occurs, and after the investigator does their full investigation, at the conclusion of that, they make recommended findings, and they send those recommended findings. They say, you alleged, let's say you alleged that an officer used excessive force against me on such and such date. And the investigator, let's say the investigator agrees. I agree that you're right, and that was a policy violation. They would send that notice saying, I recommend that this be sustained. There may be more than one allegation, and they would go through each allegation, whatever the complainant, however they framed up what the complainant said happened, and whether it's sustained or not sustained. That notification goes out to both the complainant and the covered employee. The covered employee is our shorthand for meaning any sworn member of PPB or a supervisor of a sworn member, which is the charter language of who's covered by this. At the same time that notice goes out, it also goes out to the chief of police. The chief can also designate that to someone else. At that point, we're going on to the next slide, which is the investigation. We included a certain time frame for the complainant and the covered employee and the PPB chief to provide feedback to the investigator. So if there's additional information provided that suggests, oh, I missed something in my investigation, they can do more investigation. Or if they feel, nope, there's nothing more, I've covered everything, nobody raised anything new, then the entire packet, any feedback that was received from the complainant, any feedback received from the covered employee, and any feedback from the chief, PPB chief, all that packet along with the investigation file goes to the panel that got assigned to the case. Our panel has 3 members of the board on each panel. And we call that review panel. So the review panel will meet in executive session. This is something required by state law as far as disclosing information about an investigation or disciplinary matter at this point. And so they'll meet in executive session, which means outside of the public. And then they review the investigation, and under public meetings law, and we'll talk about this more a little bit later, but they reach consensus on next steps. Next steps can be, they think that the proposed findings, the allegation is either sustained or it's not sustained. So if it's not sustained, it goes over to the right. They come out of executive session and they have to vote at that point. This is the allegation, is it sustained, is it not sustained? If, on the other hand, they reach consensus that the allegation or allegations are sustained, we're on the left-hand side, and they propose discipline under whatever binding rules. Right now, we have a corrective action guide, but, and they propose discipline. A letter issues to the employee. This is our normal process. We do an investigation. If we find that there's an allegation that's sustained, we issue a letter to the employee saying, this is what we heard happened. These are the findings that we've concluded occurred, and we've sustained those allegations, and this is the discipline that we're recommending and we're considering. That is required because that proposes discipline. It gives the opportunity to any employee, any public employee, who's covered by a collective bargaining agreement or has some property rights in their job, they have a right to a due process meeting and to respond to the allegations against them. So we have that due process meeting for the covered employee, and if they have a union representative, that union rep would be present, and they say, we're keeping it the way it is, or maybe there's something, we're sustaining it, but we're changing it slightly. They're off to the left-hand side, they reach consensus, they come out to the public, they vote, and then ultimately, staff would write a letter that the panel would then review and approve. And that would be some kind of discipline letter. If they, for some reason, change their mind due to the due process meeting and decide that the allegation is no longer, they don't think it's sustained, they reach consensus on that, they would come out and vote that way. And no matter what, we felt it would be good to offer voluntary mediation regardless of how we ended up, whether it's sustained, not sustained, that would be offered. It's all voluntary, no matter where you're at in the mediation process, it's voluntary. So if the complainant wants to go, then they'll go. If the covered employee wants to go, they'll go. If either of those two parties say, no, I don't want to go, it's not required. All right, sorry, that was long, but
I think,
hopefully it helps.
I think when we move to the second question, what we're going to do is take pieces of these, which you all presented to us in a letter. So I failed to say before that after each section, we would invite questions so that we can stay on topic and answer all the questions on that. So why don't we go ahead and move to the next question? So the next question was asking about where people can file complaints, and will the OCPA receive all the complaints and forward some to IA, or would two agencies be receiving complaints? And the answer is that all complaints would go through the OCPA. The OCPA would be the one diverting cases to IA if they are not within the OCPA's jurisdiction. And so I think under our, this proposed code, there would be plenty of room for the OCPA to create their administrative rules on what that process looks like, how they accept complaints, and what they make available to the public or anyone who wants to make a complaint. Any questions about that specifically?
I do. By chance, like say, is there possibly that there could be, being that, the public's not so much involved inside the IA, can it be compromised in a sense? I'm sorry. Oh yeah, thank you. Yeah, where possibly that it would be unfairly looked at. Like say, hey, this person, that's all I'm saying. Like it could be unfairly looked at. Like and say, what, I already got an idea of this person that we're just not going to deal with it, although it's a valid complaint. Is there possibly like it could be actually compromised by already a negative feeling about certain people, certain.
Well, I think since all complaints would go to the civilian oversight system, I think what I'm understanding, if I understand your question correctly, you're worried that a complaint that was sent to IA for the police bureau to investigate internally, that you would be worried that they would not fairly assess a complaint. Yeah. So I think that's in this system, all of those would go to the OCPA. The OCPA would have records of every complaint that came through their office, and I think there would be opportunities that are outlined in the process where they can follow up with PPB about what the outcome was. Depending on the type of complaint, they may be able to actually review the entire file and provide their own findings before discipline is issued. Did that answer your question?
What's the time that it would take for a process to be taken care of to where, because I know that people are, they got, their time's just as important as anybody else's, so I'm just curious on that.
So under the settlement agreement between the city and the United States Department of Justice, we have 180 days to perform an investigation. We did not include that in the code language. It's already under the DOJ settlement agreement. And it seemed appropriate that if the board wanted to adopt a faster timeline, for example, that it would be up to them to do that. But we certainly, as long as we're under the DOJ settlement agreement, we certainly can't take longer than 180 days for the investigation to go through. Yeah.
We've got a couple more hands.
Yeah, I apologize. Mine were actually for the first question. And I might have already missed this because I slipped in a little bit late. Who will the review panel be comprised of? Who will run that selection process? how long will their tenure or term be? And, yeah, that's
Questions, do we want
I think those are part of our later questions, but yes, we will, we'll make a note so that we're sure we come back to them. So, and if we don't answer them at that point, you let us
back.
know. I know you will.
to? Thank you.
And we've got another
Then we
right
had up
here.
here, and then back there. Thanks. Right here, then.
Hi, I'm Angie Tomlinson, and I am a former member of the PAC, and I just have a quick question related to the navigator. Can the board put in their administrative rules that they want the navigator to start immediately?
Yes. Do you want to?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say, just so that it's clear, I think everyone who has reviewed the PAC's finding that we've spoken with was fully supportive of having a complaint navigator. I have worked as a police oversight professional. I was an independent monitor in Denver, and boy, do I wish I would have had, someone to play that role and help people who were, frustrated with a similarly, opaque system. We would fully support, the board wanting to do that immediately if possible. And I think the only reason to do it the way that we did is because we're trying to preserve the board to have the flexibility to make its own processes. But we wanted to make sure that we had set, a firm line where, beyond that would be unacceptable. But I think there's absolutely no opposition from our perspective, from what I've heard from City Council, to having a complaint navigator from the very beginning.
This gentleman in the back first, and then.
Gotta let you do it.
I have a flow chart question. When discipline is imposed, what happens if there are grievances and/or arbitration? And does the result of that come back to a public session to be acknowledged?
Can I make sure I heard the question? What happens if there's a grievance, an arbitration, and it's sent back to be resolved?
If there is a grievance or arbitration, does the result of that get sent back to the review panel to be at least acknowledged in a public session that the discipline has changed?
Can we take a hold on that question so that we get through and then take it at the end, just similarly? If we don't answer it through this, we'll come back to it? Okay, thank you so much. I'm trying to write these down, I think. Oh,
And
great.
did we see one more hand over here? Okay, great, thank you. Yeah, and so do any of the PAC members have any comment at this point before we move on to the next point? Okay, great, thank you. Next one.
I'm sorry, I was looking at the chat to make sure we didn't miss any questions there. Yeah.
So this question is about the budget of why the board has a budget that's larger than IPR and internal affairs combined, and why would they need to limit the number of investigations it should do? Keeping many of the investigations under the jurisdiction of IA threatens the trust the community will have in the system by keeping police investigating their own. And there was concern about maintaining status quo and dissatisfaction. So we will talk about the respective categories, but in the city's proposal, we took some of the categories recommended that were adopted by the voters and expanded on it, and took the PAC's recommendations and expanded on some of it. For example, the charter and the PAC recommended that the board investigate force resulting in injury. We expanded that to all claims of excessive force. So even if somebody claims that an officer used force, but they didn't actually have an injury from that, it just made them uncomfortable or something like that, that still will go to the board. So we kept that within their jurisdiction. So there's places where we expanded on it and places where we took it out and moved it over. But I think that we weren't looking at the budget. As far as in deciding what the jurisdiction was, we were focusing on what cases make the most sense for each entity. for truthfulness cases, I know there's some questions about that. We'll get to that later. But those cases, for example, are challenging cases in any entity for a public employer. When those go to arbitration, they're hard to uphold. And IA has historically done a pretty good job of those, and oftentimes they don't even go to arbitration on the truthfulness.
Can you say what that means, though?
So that's an allegation that the officer lied.
And when we say it doesn't go to arbitration, it's because the discipline imposed is not grieved, or it is, it's not
Or it's
grieved.
grieved and it's not taken to arbitration. And I will tell you that when you have dishonesty for a police officer, that is almost always going to be a fireable offense. So we do, as you all know, the charter language says that the jurisdiction of the board is the cases that are listed out, the force cases, the discrimination cases, and the violations of state or federal constitutional law. All those cases by charter go to the board. And in addition, cases as the board sees fit or as mandated by code. What we set up was that if there are other cases that the board sees fit to take on their own, we just want to have that, they will go to council, we'll make a change in the code, put it under the board's jurisdiction. We just wanted it clear so that people know ahead of time, where is a complaint going to go? If the board at any point feels it's not being handled appropriately by IA, they can look at those cases and decide to take them. She's coming. Oh. But in answer to the question about the budget, I think our focus was on setting up a system that would work well. Catherine, sorry, I went that way first.
So in terms of this question, but also kind of getting at a larger issue. So first of all, I can speak loudly. If we can, if we don't get, now it's working? Okay. So
Repeat the question? Yeah, we'll do that.
it seems like if we're saying that one of the criteria for success is that the cases aren't grieved and taken to arbitration, we're basically saying that the criteria for success is that the police are happy with the result.
The police are what? I'm sorry. What was the
Police
last?
are happy with the result because they're not contesting the whatever punishment was imposed. So
Well-
explain to me why that's incorrect.
What the goal is that the discipline should be upheld if it goes to arbitration. So if discipline is not arbitrated, then whatever the board imposes is what the discipline is, end of story. But if it does get grieved and it goes to arbitration, our goal is that the board's discipline is upheld in arbitration and not reversed.
And that is the criteria with IA that happens a lot, is that they go to arbitration and are upheld. Because what I have heard is that the cases going through IA are not going to arbitration a lot of the time. And that's because the police are not contesting the discipline, which would suggest that they are happy with the outcome.
Well, I think, so the question was, and I want to repeat it because I don't think was a concern that the police are happy or content with the outcome, the chief's decision on the IA investigation, because they don't go to arbitration. So I would say a lot of cases, there's a grievance filed, which is the first step to get something to arbitration. So often we'll see a grievance, but then whether or not it goes to arbitration is a different thing. And there aren't a ton of cases that end up going to arbitration. They just kind of sit there, and then eventually, if the union decides not to move it forward to arbitration, it goes away eventually. It'll get withdrawn. And then the discipline that was imposed is upheld. So for example, when I'm talking about truthfulness, you're talking about terminating an officer because that's 99.9% of the time, that's going to be the outcome of a truthfulness allegation. When an officer has been determined that they've lied, they're going to get fired. And so unless that goes to arbitration, it's going to remain as upheld. And I think our concern was to ensure that regardless of which process it goes through, whether it's through IA or the board, I just, personally, I'm one of the people who handles those arbitrations. I want to have the best case I can if it's going to get challenged. Ideally, it doesn't even get challenged. That's the best case scenario, because that means the board made a good decision, that the union's looking at it and saying, we're not going to win on this, we're going to accept it.
So, first of all, can people hear me? Okay, great. I'm Catherine McDowell, former PAC, and the question I wanted to get at is sort of the secondary question here, which is not so much the budget, but the jurisdiction of the board. So I hope it's okay to ask about it at this time. The question I had, and this also gets into the rulemaking issue. So we read the code that the board could handle the cases it sees fit or mandated by code. So we listed the things that we thought were important that the board should handle. And the result of that was really that the board would handle all complaints except officer complaints about another officer, which would be handled by internal affairs. So that was our vision, and that was as a result of a lot of discussion and community input. Then looking at your revision to our proposal, you know, it's a much different division where internal affairs handles many more types of cases and the board handles a much smaller number of cases. And then what I'm hearing is the way you all read the charter is that the board could then decide to expand to that larger list that we first had, because that would be as it sees fit, not necessarily because code dictates it. So that's the first question. Is that true, that the board, through its rules, could expand to the list of cases, types of cases that we had envisioned in our proposal?
We put it in that they would go back to council to have code change to expand the jurisdiction so that it's in code. But that as sees fit means that if the board deems fit for something type of allegation to go to them, they tell council, it's adopted because charter requires them to adopt that. On the other hand, if council feels there's something that should go to the board in addition, they can also adopt and make that change as well. And the point of that was to just have a clear system up front of which avenue your case is going to go. So at any point when the board says to council, hey, change the code, we want these types of allegations, the charter says you have to say, okay, we're changing the code. So
I do have a follow-up question. Just get the mic back. And my follow-up question is really on the rulemaking issue because, you know, already 2 or 3 times you've referred to the board's rulemaking authority. We've taken this out, but the board, in its wisdom, could add this back in by rulemaking. And what we've been very concerned about is that in reviewing the rulemaking process in the city, it seems like in most cases, the code allows the board, it gives the board the ability to, you know, individual bureaus and bureau directors, the ability to issue rules. But in this case, the board does not have that ability to issue rules. The board can propose rules to the city, you know, the city administrator ultimately, and I think whoever runs the business office now temporarily. So that seemed to me, especially since IPR has the ability to adopt its own rules, that seems to me like a reduction of the board's authority vis-a-vis IPR because it can't issue its own rules. So in some ways, this gets to our concerns that you've taken a lot of our proposals and said, oh, the board can adopt the rules if it sees fit, but then you've reduced the rulemaking authority of the board to less than what IPR currently has. So maybe you could speak to that, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah. So I know you're familiar with this, but just for other people, as far as rulemaking authority, when you look at it, we've got our city charter, which think of as our constitution. We've got city code and ordinances, which are like state law. That's the equivalent to that. And I know you know this, Catherine. But and then we have administrative rules that flesh, and each one fleshes out a little more, right? So at the top, you have our city charter on the oversight system is like 3 pages long. The code, your recommendation was 96, ours was like 27, 28. It's still filling out a lot of the details. Then you have administrative rules that fill out even more details. And then underneath you have policies that fill out even more details. Policies are still within the authority of the board and the office to adopt those policies of how to run everything day in, day out. Administrative rules are a step up from that. So for example, our HR administrative rules for the citywide, those go to either the chief administrative officer has the authority to adopt them, or the city council does. It's not something that like HR can just adopt and say, these administrative rules are going to apply. So we tried to follow that process that was already set up at the city for administrative rules, but then said with policies, which, like you said, every bureau can adopt their own policies, including IPR. So as far as you're talking about policies, they can adopt their own policies. But when we're talking administrative rules, those generally either go to the chief administrative officer, or later it'll be the city administrator, or to council. So that's kind of where we tried to set up that same process.
Not the current system, because under the current system, IPR has the ability to adopt its own rules.
And I got a question too in regards to ranking.
There's someone before, that in line before you, online. Yeah, you go ahead and finish your,
I was just going to say that under the current system, IPR has the ability to adopt rules, not just policies and directives, but rules. And so that's why it seems to matter that it's a reduction in the current authority of the Oversight Board, because it's taking that rulemaking authority away that IPR currently has, coupled with the fact that you've taken a lot of our proposals and put them in that bucket. That has kind of shined a light on exactly what rulemaking authority the board has. And it seems like right now it has less than IPR currently does and less than other bureaus do. So you might just take a look at that.
We'll take a look at it. Thank you.
and Dan is online. It's your turn, Dan.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Dan Handelman. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a former member of the Police Accountability Commission. And I do appreciate that we're having this meeting. I think the thing that got left out of the letter we sent you is the opening, where one of the concerns we expressed is that this is being seen by the city, I think, as exclusively about the employees who are being complained about. And the way we approached it was, this is about the people who think the police did something wrong to them. And the flow chart that you showed and the answer you gave to this question kind of indicate that the city still doesn't understand. One of the reasons people don't like using the system right now is they don't want people in the police bureau investigating police. And leaving cases to internal affairs when there's a community member involved is going to ensure that this system doesn't get trusted by the public. They're going to have a $12 million budget. There's no reason to limit the number of cases they review. The charter, you said the word, it says or in city code. That means as they see fit, or in city code, meaning the board gets to decide what they want to investigate, not that city council has to sign off on it. So that's interfering with their independent authority to require them to go to council to get that signed off on. So that's a number of different thoughts, but they all kind of come down to the same concern, which is, like when you go through the flow chart, the board, the members of the board, the community members on the board don't do anything with the case until it's already been investigated and sent back to people with a proposed finding, and then they finally get to hear it at the very end of the process. So it goes against the spirit of what the charter is all about, which is a community-led oversight system. So I'd like you to address that and then the specific way that interacts with these other questions you already answered.
Well, I think we have a different interpretation. You're talking about the or, and I think when I was already answering Catherine McDowell's question and talking about the or, the way we read it is that it's as the board sees fit, and we're just setting up a process so that people know which way to go, and it's clear in code where you go. It doesn't mean that you can't, the board at any time can go, and as they see fit means council needs to adopt those changes in their code to allow for that to go to the board. So it is not stopping the board from taking whatever types of allegations they see fit to take on. There is nothing we have done that has stopped that at all. Just setting up a process for it to happen. Additionally, as mandated by code, if council decides that they think other cases should go to the board and they feel like, hey, we think that the board would do a better job with these types of cases, they can also make that determination. But it is not saying the board, it doesn't take any authority away from the board to get that change made at all.
I would also like to just point out that I think, Mr. Handelman, you have to understand the difference between the board and the PAC, because the board is the one that will decide what is within its jurisdiction through the process Heidi identified. The PAC made recommendations, and we appreciated those, but you can't conflate what the PAC wanted with what the board may want once it's stood up. And I think that's,
I think that was our third job to design that process, which we did.
So everyone can hear me fine?
Question
He was
was,
just saying. He was saying he thought it was the PAC job to design that process.
I think that the PAC's job was to make recommendations for that process. Yep, I agree with that. But I think that it doesn't mean that the PAC decides the same thing as what the board decides, right? They're not interchangeable, is I guess my point. City council has always been part of this process, and Commissioner Hardesty, I think in December even spoke to the PAC and specifically pointed out that the board should be working with council. So I don't think that's a new idea.
We have, right over here, thanks.
Thank you. So this is concerning language, first off. Is it possible for, the language that's inputted to be manipulated by the authority that we're talking about to basically make the case for them no matter what via the language? And also, my next question is also, my mother was killed by what's called a stinger by the police. They were using a stinger, which basically shoots radio frequencies and you can't see it. So basically, how do you prove that this right here is going on if you have something that has no it leaves no trace, no track marks. So back in 2008, my mother was killed by the stinger. By the I believe the Portland police used it's what's called a stinger. My mother suffered depression already, really bad, for many years, and this stinger, which is I believe from drones, shoots RF frequencies, which I have the patent numbers right here if you'd like to see, and it killed my mother. And so I was unable to prove this for quite a while. So ultimately, where is when I get the chance to prove it, is there a is being as 2008 and I can prove it now? Is there a time frame on? Okay, so yeah.
I'm glad you asked that. I mean, first off, I would say we removed a timeline for the PAC had recommended that a complaint be brought within a certain number of years, and we took that out. I will say, as an attorney for the city, if somebody has a complaint they want to bring, whether it's 10 years old or 5 years old, they can bring it forward, especially if it's a discrimination claim or harassment claim based on protected class status. Personally, no matter how old that is, I'd like to know about it. Whether we can take much action on it discipline-wise, I don't know, because there will be some questions about stainless, but it's still really important that we know about it, and so we can watch out for it and ensure that that's not happening going forward. So no matter what, but for one, if there's a regardless of the forum, whether it's internal affairs or whether it's the community lib board, if there's no way to prove it, it's not going to matter which place you go to, because if you can't.
The ones that are supposed to serve and protect us that are actually they make
I just mean, like, as far as your question about which place you can go to, we're just talking about, can you take this claim to the community board? If you're bringing a complaint that they used excessive force, that will go to the board.
Right. So I want to say, first of all, I'm really sorry about the loss of your mother. And it sounds like a longer conversation would be good to have offline with some of the specifics around that. I understand. I do get that. Right.
So I think this right here needs to be addressed sometimes. I'm a person.
Right, no, I get that. And so's everybody else that's here that came for this meeting, and there's like 30 points. Right.
I want them to know.
So,
This doesn't happen to them.
no, thank you for bringing it up. Yeah, and just going to ask you to now, yeah. And so now I'm going to move on to Faith online, who has her hand up. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Faith Aiken. I'm a former member of the PAC. Appreciate the time all, and I really want to spend time. I think the conversation that we're at now feels incredibly critical around the jurisdiction of the board's decision making. This feels like a place that there is significant discrepancy between what we've understood as the PAC as our recommended work body of work and what I'm now hearing from you at the table, I want to make it very clear that we were very clear on our scope and what we were to do with our recommended findings. And we had an attorney that the city paid for to write a code package. So I want to make it very clear that we did not overextend our scope. And so there's no miscommunication from what we understood. And if we were overextending our scope, we should have been told that months ago, rather than having this come back to us to respond to in 2 weeks, minding you that we're all here voluntarily, having met over 2 years voluntarily, whereas paid city employees, you had every opportunity to come and tell us what we were doing was not within scope. So either we need to extend and push to the DOJ that we need more time, or you're breaking the commitment that was outlined to us. And so either state it clearly that you're breaking the commitment that was outlined to us, or we need to extend the timeline, because 30 days is egregious. And then for you to tell us that we overextended our scope is just unacceptable. Like it's unacceptable. So I think that I know you have a presentation outlined and I appreciate the work you've done on it, but this feels like the biggest component of the night is what is within the jurisdiction of the board, what goes into city code versus the rules that they're allowed to make. Why would we have spent 2 years making recommendations for then the board to just determine what, for a new set of volunteers to have to come back is an egregious sign of mistrust.
Thank you for that, Faith. And I definitely, want to acknowledge the frustration that I've heard from the folks who worked very hard on this. I know that. We all know that you worked incredibly hard. I do need to push back a little bit, though, on whether or not you've heard that you were overstepping, because I think, if I mentioned Commissioner Hardesty and her visit with you in the December meeting, and she was very, very transparent about her concerns about overreach. She was very direct about things that, in her words, were not your business. And that included things like, budget, that included things like bargaining, that included, several different things. And she was very clear. Now, after the work session that was had, I believe, in April, City Council wrote a letter back trying to articulate concerns that they had at that point as well. And so I just want to push back to say that, to the idea that no one was communicating with you that there might be some overstepping outside the scope of the charter. Because I do think that was happening. And I do think that, those of us who have been following this since the beginning are aware of that as well. So I would encourage anyone to go back and rewatch some of those if they're not sure if that's what was said. And feel free, feel free. We want to communicate, and I understand the frustration. 30 days is not a long time when we're talking about 2 years of work. I think we all understand that, and we are doing, what we can do to try to address that now. Anything that anyone wants to say about the jurisdictional piece?
Just on the, and then I see
And I've got some online.
people online, thank you so much. On the jurisdictional piece, I think to focus on that itself, Faith, I just want to respond that in some areas, we expanded what you had recommended. Just so folks know, of the force cases that that IPR and PPB receive, allegations of excessive use of force, 70% of those are what we would call Category 4, where you're alleging that there was not any injury. So we added those. So if you're saying there's I don't know, I'm totally making up numbers here. If there's 100 cases of allegations of excessive use of force, you left off, in the PAC's recommendation, there were 70 of those that were not going to get heard by the board, and we added those back in, so only 30 would have gone. So I do want to say, we expanded in some places, and that was significant. It's not a small number, and so I really wanted to stress that. There are other areas where we said, let's see how this goes with IA doing it, because there are good reasons. For example, criminal law violations, that's what police do. They investigate violations of criminal law. If they're not doing a good job at that, then we have other concerns. If the board feels that they're not doing a good job with investigating the misconduct allegations, then they go to council and say, we want those allegations going forward. It doesn't change the fact that the jurisdiction, if the board feels that they look at these cases and say, these aren't going the way we want them to go, they change that. So that remains the same. I think we just looked at it and said, there's some areas, there were many areas you recommended that we adopted, and there were some areas that we said, let's try this other way and come back to this. But the door's open. So that was the main thing I wanted to say about the jurisdiction.
Well, I'm actually going to take, Debbie online, and then the woman right behind you, and then you. Hi, Debbie.
Hi, I'm Debbie Iona. So just a few things related to this particular question. One, I've been paying attention to police oversight since like 2000. And one thing that we've heard from both the Department of Justice and just in general is that it's confusing to have a two-track system where you've got the civilian agency and the police bureau both taking care of complaints. And so this just continues with that, that situation. Then the other thing, we've got a lot of encouragement from City Council as PAC members to get out and listen to the public, which we did. And one of the things that people brought up was they don't like the idea of police investigating police. And so this continues with that. And so I feel like the PAC's approach to have a comprehensive list of cases that would be under their control makes more sense than splitting it up. And then if the new board finds that it's just too much for them to handle, they could use what the charter allows them to do and say, oh, we don't want to do that kind of case anymore, and send it back to internal affairs if that seemed to be the way to go. So thank you for listening.
Thank you, Debbie. So I've got the woman in the black with the great earrings. She's coming with the microphone for you.
Debbie might have helped me.
Okay.
With someone
Thanks. Okay, so.
Because I was trying to figure out where the point of contention was, because I recognize that the PAC spent a lot of time and energy. And also I understand that once it was handed off, kind of the point was it was handed off. So I guess from an outside perspective, I maybe my ignorance allows me to accept like the fact that it has been handed off. So the understanding that the new board would be the ones that would now, okay, you built this beautiful machine, now they get to drive it. But you don't necessarily get to pick their upholstery. You know what I mean? So I guess I kind of understand that part. And I think that's sort of what Debbie was speaking to was the yes and. There were some baseline things they wanted to make sure was inside of this car that have been stripped out. And they just want to have a real conversation about making sure that some of those things stay. They got to have the wood grain dashboard, like that's an important part of the car. You know what I mean? But okay, we can negotiate on the seats.
Thank you. Great summarizing. Appreciate it. So we have one here, and then Pastor Weisner over there.
Thank you. Again, I'd like to address just the stinger. At the time, 20 years went by where I was abused by this stinger, not knowing what's going on, me having to leave the state many times over, not knowing what's going on. There was no transparency as far as the weapons being used by the police, which basically, for me, when I went and made a formal complaint, with the Independent Police Review Board, because my complaint was so serious, they just continued on with the abuse and even shot me and gave me a misdemeanor when I was just walking across the street, no weapon, nothing. And yet the abuse continued. And so, here I am being abused, shot, and hurt by the Portland police and these stingers, you know, these radio frequencies that killed my mother because I'm making a formal complaint, and nobody, and people thought that I was crazy. Here I am, you know, running for my life. And so here I am today, once again, saying, you know, whatever the Independent Police Review Board was doing before obviously wasn't working. And
Right.
so, I mean, ultimately, if it's trying to be pushed over back towards the police to where they have the authority to make the decision on whether they can continue to abuse somebody, kill their mother, and do them things, no, I'm not okay with that.
Okay,
that's not
thanks. And that's on point, and we'll go with other points. Thank you so much. And now we have, thank you, appreciate it.
Yeah, CMOP
And then
Hussein
Pastor Weiss.
Ehem, his former PAC member, Phase 2 co-chair. And I think it's important to mention that as co-chair, for what's to respond, in essence, to maybe even kind of improve upon the memory of what was happening when Commissioner Hardesty was really worried about us stretching and kind of going out of bounds a little bit, or, you know, kind of pushing ourselves into ways where we would go a bit above and beyond what the scope of the work. That was, again, I recall it clearly because I was Phase 2 along with two of my co-chairs for that. And it was specifically, her concern was specifically as we were heading into our fact-finding phase and research phase. And it was to be able to, it was a concern that we would go into the sticks and weeds when it came to that particular part of our phase. And that we would take up too much time and meander. So we really did consider that feedback as an entire committee. Matter of fact, 2 years of work and voluntary, we took every word that came from the City Council very seriously. So when we were told that, we made sure that our fact-finding and our research was tight as a drum. And that is all the work that allowed us to arrive to where we are at today. So we did take those words very seriously, and we worked upon those lines of communication. We were very, we were not happy at first, but we had to. It was also like a good cup of joe for us. Like, it woke us up a little bit and made us focus a little bit more on making sure that whatever we do, we land, and it allows us to basically improve the product that we recommend. And so that's where we kind of came from. But to be able to reflect upon that, I felt like it was a bit of a false equivalency, because we understand the heart of the matter when they were actually speaking directly to us about making sure that we would deliver something right and we wouldn't meander and go beyond our scope, which is the reason why we're incredibly confident about what we put together, and that it's all well within scope. And especially, I think it's important to mention, we've said it many times, and we'll probably say it a few more times tonight, the spirit of the measure 26217 is what we had to build. That's all good.
Thank you. Okay, now over to Pastor Weisner, and then over to you.
I just want to go back to the jurisdictional piece, as the young lady here was saying. Could you explain that a little bit more? Because if I'm following history correctly about how the investigated, the IA, and then the board is going to be those comparing what cases are going to be able to be chosen out of, is that fair?
Thank you. There are types of allegations, and so the PAC had said these types of allegations. The charter language has certain types of allegations. So we've just said these types of allegations are in the jurisdiction of the board. Other allegations will go to IA unless, again, the board sees fit to take them under their jurisdiction, and we just change the code.
The reason I'm trying to track that is because it kind of reminds me of the Hea Poot situation. There was a case where that the CRC in the investigation of those areas didn't get actually investigated, like the community oversight was weighing in on that. So I'm just tracking from the Albina Ministerial Alliance time to the recommendations of the PAC and trying to get more clarity on what is actually in his question here of where that the jurisdiction and the IA would pick the cases, I guess, and pass them on.
I think that, so the community will investigate the types of cases that are listed, obviously, in the charter, and then we expanded on those, and we adopted many of the ones that the PAC recommended, and then definitely did not adopt some of those. Am I missing? I'm sorry, Pastor Wisner. Okay.
So,
Will there also be some type of printout or questions that has been asked so that we can kind of go back over and look at some of those as well?
yeah, the letter's available that was written by the PAC. Well, this is being taped, so yeah, thank you. And I just, yeah, let me have you speak, and then I'm going to say something about how we're rolling.
Thank you. Heidi, can you speak further about the feedback loop that we built into any and all cases that do go to IA? I want to be clear that this was a conversation that we did have in the sort of in the review of the final code, but I want to be clear. The board ultimately will know every single case that went to IA, will know every single fact, and will know what was determined at that point. So I want to be clear, the board will have knowledge of every single case that is reviewed.
So, yeah, I mean, because all complaints will go into the office, then any complaint that comes in, the board's going to be aware of. This complaint came in and it went this way or it went that way, right? And then for cases that we understood were of serious concern, but we thought might be appropriate for IA to do, were truthfulness, criminal law allegations, and courtesy violations. So what we set up for those three types of allegations, because they were ones that there seemed to be more community interest in, was this feedback loop where IA will do its investigation. When they're done with their investigation, they will send the entire investigative file over to the office, the community office, for the director or whoever they want to review that file and make sure that they are comfortable with that investigation, and then they learn about the outcome of what did the chief actually do in that instance, so they're also comfortable with the final determination of discipline or not discipline. And then the, the director will periodically provide summaries to the board of those matters so that the board is aware, here's what we're seeing, this is what IA did, this is what the chief did. And if at any point the board decides, hey, we're hearing enough concerns about we don't like how they're doing a certain type of allegation, that's when they just go back to council and just change the code to add that into their jurisdiction. So we did create that feedback loop to ensure that if there are things, particularly those three allegations, the full investigation file, but all the complaints come in first to the office, so they'll be aware of all the complaints that are coming in.
So,
saying earlier about in the areas of where the rule is now lessened, I think that's what the young lady was saying earlier.
I think that it's different. I mean, like I said, if you're talking about force cases, we've added in 70% of force cases the PAC had left out, we added those back in. So I don't know when you're saying we've shrunk it down, we did take some things out. I'm not trying to say that we didn't. I'm just also saying we also added. So I don't know that the pool of cases is less or more. I don't know that you can say that at this point, but the door is always open. That's what you can always say, is that door is always open, because the board can always say, as we see fit, these types of allegations need to come up to us going forward, whether it's truthfulness, whether it's courtesy, or any other type of allegation.
thank you, Heidi. So I see a lot of hands, but I'm also getting feedback online that people are concerned about the pace at which the meeting is moving. There are many, many more things to cover, and so we had originally decided we would do, and we would have comment between each one, but I'm wondering if we maybe need to try switching it up somehow. And I'm sorry, I see a lot of interest in this, and as Stephanie said, there are other opportunities that will be provided, but I'm getting the, let's get it moving. There's so much more to cover.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think we want to move forward, and we want to, questions that we don't get, like I said, we are absolutely collecting those, and we'll be happy to do our best to address them, and certainly to present those to the decision makers after the feedback's collected. So.
Yeah, and and also to say that the questions, well, the questions that are coming up on that people are writing online, if they're not directly related to what we're talking about, we're not looking at them right now, but we'll be capturing them and finding a way to loop back and make sure that there's answers from folks about them. So we're going to move on to the next slide and see if we can go a little bit faster.
Okay, so this question is about, the city attorney stated that they thought or were afraid that if there were appeals, board members might get upset at each other, at one another for coming to different conclusions. Is this based on documented anger generated when assistant chiefs or internal affairs controvert findings proposed by supervising officers in the current system? Otherwise, why eliminate a form of checks and balances from the PAC's plan? So I think the main reason that we changed the appeal was to be able to uphold potential discipline. We had set up an appeal process early on so that if an investigator decides that the facts, even assuming they're true, don't warrant an investigation because they don't violate policy, that's where the appeal occurs. So we put that in there. What we didn't want was for one community board to review what another community board did. So if the first community board determined that that the allegation was not sustained, the PAC's recommendation had set up where the complainant could appeal that determination to another community board. So you were still talking about the same board, right? They've just got different groups of panels. That's something PAC recommended. We adopted that. So you're saying this group of panel members, we want another group of panel members to look what they did. That, if this group of panel members that's reviewing the first one, if they come to a different determination and say, no, sorry, you should have sustained that, I'm going to have a really hard time in arbitration upholding that, because the arbitrator's going to hear two different groups of community-led decision makers came to the opposite conclusion about the same facts. That makes it really, really difficult. And I want to be able to uphold the discipline that this board does. And when you already have that community board making a decision, having another community board potentially reverse that decision, there's also some concern that can create tension between folks. That's what I was talking about. I don't know, afraid, I don't remember the word I used. I know it was me who talked about that. But that when you have a board of 21, whether it's 21 or 33 as you recommended, I don't think that matters. But you have people saying, one group saying it's X and another group saying it's Y. A side concern is that can create tension between them. That was the least of my concerns. The main concern I have is being able to uphold discipline when the board meets out. If they decide that a complaint is sustained, I want to be able to uphold it. And if I've got competing community boards saying the opposite, I'm going to have a really, really hard time. So that was our main interest in that.
Thank you, Heidi. I've had a suggestion online that perhaps what would be the thing to make sense is to have just PAC members respond at this point and then have community open comment time near the end of the meeting, which is the traditional way we do a lot of meetings. I think that makes a lot of sense. Could people live with that? Okay, I think the bulk of folks feel like they can, so I'm going to encourage you to keep your notes for things that you want to make sure you can communicate on. I know this is complicated, and the PAC members wrote the letter and have been waiting for this feedback. So let's try that for a little while, and I'm sorry that it doesn't feel good to you. So is there any PAC member that has something that they want to say at this point? Dan?
Yes, well, I pointed out at City Council that the ability for community members to appeal has been part of the system for 40 years. It was the only thing that could be done by the community boards and these old systems. And one of the things that we talked about, but we didn't want to create two different tiers of members of the new board. We talked about it at some of our meetings with the idea of having a separate panel that was only there to hear appeals. And maybe that's something for you to think about, so you can avoid those kind of concerns that you just raised. But taking away the ability to appeal and making it so that the investigators are saying what the proposed finding is going to be, and then giving it to the complainant, and then they can feed back to the investigators, again, pulls the community members who are supposed to be deciding on these cases out of the process until the very end. We also had suggested that there should be an appeal available to people who had deadly force inflicted upon them or a loved one. And so by removing that appeal, now you're taking away something that the community has been asking for a very long time, and happened to Keaton Otis's father, that he couldn't appeal the finding in that case. And also the officers already have two venues to appeal, the grievance process and the civil service board, as well as this the due process hearing. And you're only giving the community member the ability to appeal if their case gets turned down. And the way you've written it, they won't have a complaint navigator at that time because there was no decision to investigate. So they won't know how to file the appeal. So I really think you need to go back to the drawing board and look at where you wrote, but I'd like to hear your response to what I just said.
I can speak to a couple of the things you said, Mr. Handelman. And number one, I don't think that what we wrote cuts out a navigator for people. Our intent was fully to allow them to have a navigator to help navigate the appeal process.
That's step 3, not in step 1.
No, we left, but our code language said that's the
Latest.
The latest, right? It can be no later than if the investigation proceeds. Nothing prohibits it being earlier. If the CBPA thinks it should be earlier, they can do it earlier. If the OCPA decides it should be earlier, they can do it earlier. Nothing prohibits them from doing it earlier. Just said no later than.
And I do also want to speak to this idea that the community's been brought out of the appeal system under this. The community leads this entire system. The board is the final arbiter of every decision that comes out of this. And so they are there from the beginning, overseeing the director and the staff. They're there throughout the process, which is entirely different from what it is now. Right now, the CRC was created as an appeal body to inject community into the process and at certain points in the process where there was no community representation. Same with the PRB representation. So here, the community is throughout, the board is throughout the entire process. And so the appeal has to be done in a manner that's consistent with due process. And that timing of it is where, why it is on the decision not to investigate. And the other thing that I think we have to also be mindful of is that these are employee-employer discipline cases. These are not like criminal cases. Even in a criminal case, a complainant or a witness is a witness. They're not a party to a criminal case. And so unlike that, nope, sir, please.
Don't interrupt, no interrupting.
And so for an employee discipline case, the complainant is not a party to that case. That's legally, they are not a party to it. And that's not something that city council can change. That's state law, that's case law. And so I want to be clear when some of the things that I understand people are frustrated about are not necessarily within the scope of the city to change at all. So I just wanted to point that out.
You have.
So Heidi, can you talk a little bit about where somebody who is a complainant in a tort case is a party to a case, and does any of this prohibit that kind of process?
Right, so if there's somebody who feels that they were harmed by the police, they can file a tort claim notice with the city to say, I was harmed by the police, these are my damages, this is the harm that I've suffered. Or if it's a criminal act, you can file a complaint with the district attorney's office. I mean, you all know of cases where this city has, or the district attorney's office has sent them to another jurisdiction for the investigation to occur. So that's not, PPB investigating their own folks in certain types of allegations, right? So that this employer-employee relationship, which has to do with whether or not an employee violated city rule or policy. That's what we're looking into. That's what we have jurisdiction over, whether it be the community board, PBB, it doesn't matter who it is, CRC, all of them, the jurisdiction is over, is there a violation of city policy by an employee? In this instance, a PPB employee. Nothing within this has any impact on anybody's ability. If they want to bring a civil suit against the city because they feel an officer caused them harm, absolutely that right always exists. Well, there's statute of limitations and timelines, but I mean, that right, there are other forums to bring complaints. What we're talking about is here, we're just focusing on, did an employee violate a city policy? And what's the process we get to investigate that, and who makes that decision? The huge change in this charter language is that now there are a number of cases, those serious cases, force cases, discrimination cases, and violations of state and federal constitutional law cases. All those automatically go to this community-led board. They are making the decision. We've never had that before. We've never had a community board being the final decision maker of discipline. It really, I mean, I just want to impress upon you that that is still there, and it's a huge, huge change. And if there are things within that the board feels they should be looking into, they can take that too. We aren't cutting that off at all.
Okay, thank you, Heidi, for that. Any other PAC members have comment on this? Okay, just a reminder, if you start to listen to it online in the room, mute your computer, please. Thank you. All right, can we move to the next thing?
I was going to share, and then I stopped, and now I have to go back on, sorry. I don't know if this is, oops, screen share failed, sorry.
That's not what I do.
But that was there before, that was being weird.
Do you need to
Okay.
share screen again?
Yeah, I think I just did.
Okay.
But it's got the questions on the side. Can everybody see that okay if I leave it in this order with the slides on the left-hand side, or do you want me to fill up the whole screen?
Well, it just did it for you.
No?
That's all right.
Okay.
I see a thumbs up.
Oh, thank you. Cases outside the board where officers get time off without pay, will there still be a review board? So the question about whether there'll still be a review board, under what we're proposing, there would not still be the police review board for cases that the community board decided for the cases that are not within the jurisdiction of the community board, and they go instead to internal affairs. Our recommendation was to not have the police review board. And it's just, it's a time interest, and the police review board, I think in part was set up, as was stated earlier, to ensure that there was that community voice in there. And I think that given the community involvement in those jurisdiction, and then also those cases, the truthfulness, the criminal law violations, and the, sorry, my brain just went, it went out of my courtesy, thank you. The courtesy cases where the OCPA will have a feedback loop, so you have a large community-led input on that. We did not feel it was appropriate to keep the police review board and left it out.
Because we have that feedback loop.
Yeah, we have,
You may.
So Heidi, you made Delgado. I was a former PAC member, and I serve on the current CRC, although I'm here in my personal capacity. So if I'm understanding you correctly, we're taking the PRB out of the equation. Does that also mean that we will stand down IPR?
Yeah, I mean, the whole intent, so under the settlement agreement, the paragraph that talks about creating the community-led oversight board, under that we said we will transition cases from IPR over to the community board. So IPR will eventually, the cases, once the community board starts taking cases, IPR will finish up its cases, because that's what we agreed with DOJ we would do. But then once they're done with them, then the community board will have them all, and IPR will then go away.
So I guess just asking a follow-up on that. So obviously CRC will
CRC will also go away was the question, and yes.
At some level, though, that means that for those cases, so truthfulness and courtesy, I think, would be the one that's public-facing, right? There will be zero community input into that discipline process, except in terms of the CBPA's sort of ability to monitor and review, but they won't have any input into the actual disciplinary structure.
Well, they'll have, so they'll have a feedback loop where they review the entire file, just like currently happens by, like you, just for folks who, do you mind if I? Sure. You may as a member of CRC, and so occasionally he is on a police review board matter, because for force cases, we have both a community member from PRB and from CRC. And so in those types of cases that are going to the truthfulness, the courtesy, and the criminal law violations cases, the entire case file will go over to the OCP, the office director. They will review the entire case file and then have an opportunity to provide written feedback to the police chief on their perspective of the case, on whether or not the investigation is complete, on whether or not they agree with the recommended findings, and whatever else they want to provide feedback. If they want to recommend that they think it falls in this point under the corrective action guide, I think that is wide open for that feedback loop. Similarly, we set up a feedback loop for the police chief also to give that feedback, and we gave them the same amount of time. So it's 3 weeks for the office to provide feedback on truthfulness, courtesy, and criminal law violations. And then on the chief's end, we gave 21 days for the community board investigations to give feedback before it goes to the panel. So same process. So there will still be feedback, as extensively as they want. Pardon me?
But no decision-making.
No decision-making on those cases. And that's why in that instance that we included in there, the third paragraph of that section says that the director shall give periodic summaries to the board on the investigation and the outcome of the investigation, so that if the board feels that the PPB chief is not handling the case or IA, the way that the board feels it should be handled, that then they go back and change that.
Okay, Debbie online has something.
I just want to make sure I'm clear. So you're saying, it seemed to me what you're saying is the things that are done in internal affairs, it's the OCPA staff that's responsible for all the review. The community board will really just be getting summaries. They won't have any say in anything on those. Is that right?
Basically, the director, we put it in the hands of the director or designee. So the director can decide that somebody else should be the one reviewing them. But the decision was for the director to review that or decide somebody within their group to review that and provide that feedback to PPB. And then at that point, if the board feels that that's not being handled appropriately and they want to take jurisdiction of that, that's where they can do that. So yeah, for that particular case, and the board won't look at that individual case. But that's why we put in the summaries, so that they would have an opportunity to get that feedback loop.
Thank you, Heidi. Other PAC members? Okay, let's move on.
I think we've talked about this. I think those were the cases that are going to the cases that are going to go to internal affairs, that they'll be handling it under their jurisdiction. What we heard was that there were the truthfulness and the criminal law violations and the courtesy cases were something that there was some concern about those, and so we put that assurance in there that there would be that feedback loop included within that. But I think that if there's a recommendation that you'd like us to bring to council, that there's that feedback loop on all internal affairs cases, we can certainly bring that recommendation to council. So we're, if that's something you'd like to consider.
Yeah, and Jay, I agree with you. I can read the questions out loud if you'd like, Heidi, or someone needs to, just in case
Okay.
screen readers can't capture.
Thank you, thank you, sorry. Yeah, my
So
apologies.
I'm going to go ahead and read it now, just so everyone hears what it was.
Thanks, Judith.
For 40 years, the basis of Portland's oversight system has been civilian review of police internal affairs, whether it was the Police Internal Investigations Auditing Committee, which was called PIAC from 1982 to 2001, or the Independent Police Review, IPR, 2001 to the present. Why is the only mention of reviewing IA investigations in 35D.030.E3 limiting the review to the director making comments on criminal truthfulness and courtesy allegations? And I think you answered, but now everybody knows what the question
I
was.
did. Thank you so much, and I apologize to folks, trying to make sure we get through things and get back to more ability for people to have more input, so I apologize. I think this is a much better way to go.
Totally got it. So I think we can move to the next slide.
I think Dan has his hand up online.
Oh, Dan?
Hand-
Thanks.
Mr. Hanneman.
Yes, thank you. Well, Deputy City Attorney Brown, I'm very glad to hear you say that you might be able to go back to council and suggest that every case that goes to internal affairs has to be reviewed by the staff at OCPA. And I think we would recommend that. We would even strongly recommend that the IA not investigate cases that involve community members. But if you're going to be doing what you're doing, yes, every one of those things should be reviewed by somebody else. There's a whole system right now where there's the possibility to controvert findings that get made along the line, and you're just getting rid of that in what you've written. So I'm really hoping that is an offer that you're going to consider some of what we're saying tonight and go back to City Council again before you finalize the amendments to the DOJ and send them forward. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. Do you want me to read it, Judith, or you want to do that?
Let's have Judith read it.
And this is moving into the next category of questions too. They're kind of categorized. So reducing the board's authority and independence is the category, and then question 7. You wanna-
Okay. There are 2 areas where the PAC proposed expanding, improving the current system, and the city's response was to remove those areas altogether. Can you help us understand the rationale for A, removing appeals for everyone when PAC asked to expand appeals to include deadly force cases? And B, removing officer participation in the hearing process when the PAC asks that such participation be retained and expanded to include community members?
Well, I think we have talked about the appeals several times. If there are specific questions that folks feel I haven't, or any of us haven't already addressed, please let us know. In regards to removing officer participation, we've talked about appeals, and we haven't talked about the hearings yet. And I will tell you that there are 2 legal issues and concerns that I would expect you also heard from the attorney that you had. I know that attorney is highly respected and a really excellent labor law attorney. And I would expect that they would have had concerns with this as well, as far as having a hearing that's open to the public, for one. That state law says that a public employer with an officer is not allowed to disclose an unsubstantiated complaint against an officer, except in very limited circumstances. And that the employer has to do some looking at the facts of that case to determine whether or not that's a case where you could actually disclose the information publicly. And that's a rare circumstance where you're going to meet that burden. And so for one, you can't have a blanket rule that says that you'll always do that, because then you're not doing the balancing you need to do to make that decision about whether or not it should be released. So first of all, you can't have a blanket rule. And I think you're aware of that, because you put in the PAC, you put in you put in there, to the extent allowed by law. To us, it's not allowed by law in almost every single instance. And so to put it in there to suggest that it could be a hearing open to the public is misleading to folks. It makes people think that they're going to be able to go to all these hearings where they're going to see these investigations coming out before them, and that's in 99.9% of the cases, that's not going to be the case, because the state law says you can't. So that's one concern. The second concern is that I have real concerns again on the due process end. As a labor lawyer for many, many, many years now, the investigation, having a fair and impartial investigation is a basic tenet of just cause. Just cause is what's required for any union contract requires just cause. And having that fair and impartial investigation, which is included in your recommendations, which we adopted that part of it, that was great, is critical. Because if we don't have a fair and impartial investigation, we can't even get past go. An arbitrator will overturn it because you didn't do the investigation properly. So that really binds us in our ability to uphold discipline. And having a hearing where people are going back and forth when it's the employer's decision, in this instance, the community board is acting on behalf of the employer. It's their determination about looking over the investigation and determining whether or not there was misconduct. That's what that's about. This is an employer-employee relationship. And we need to preserve that to ensure that I'm able to uphold any discipline that they mete out. That's one of my biggest concerns.
And
I don't want to have discipline that gets overturned. I think none of us like that. I think the one case that all of you are familiar with, that where PPB did fire somebody, Frashauer, right? Not only did the PPB terminate them, the arbitrator overturned it. The city refused to enforce that arbitration award, and we refused to reinstate that officer. We got taken to the Employment Relations Board. The Employment Relations Board said, reinstate that officer. We still said no. The union appealed it up to the Court of Appeals, and we lost there. At that point, we went ahead and did it. But we did try really hard, and I want to make sure that when this board issues discipline, that we have the best chance to uphold it.
Thank you, Heidi. Did you have something?
And I think it's important for us to kind of ground ourselves in the understanding that these rules exist for all represented public employees. This is not just true for police sitting off on their own. This is true for teachers. This is true for any real city employee who's represented as part of this process. So if you are a police officer or a teacher, you would be entitled to absolutely the same rights, the same standards, the same support by the system.
Thanks. So the next question, did any PAC members have any other comment on this issue? Okay, next question. The city says they're looking at the Oversight Board's function as an investigation by an employer into the conduct of an employee for the purposes of determining if there have been any violations to that employer's rules. If that's the case, shouldn't the board be under the purview of the same deputy city administrator as the Bureau of Human Resource Operations rather than the administrator that oversees the police, public safety?
Sure. Yeah, I can take this one. I think this is a salient point, and this is very much. I want to impress upon you guys that this is very much a conversation. This is not us just bringing something forward, and you're very much not talking to a brick wall here. We are taking notes up here. So if we're ever not looking at you, we are very much taking notes, and this is among one of those things that we are going to continue to have conversations on. So right now, under the final org chart that the city is operating under for this new form, the CBPA lives under the public safety group, and so we are very much committed to, I think, having that conversation. So I think
public safety. I'm sorry.
So yeah, so the new organization chart for the city of Portland, which will take place after the 2024 election, is essentially shaking up the way that we currently organize our city government. So right now, my boss, Mingus Maps, is in charge of the Public Works Service area. And so that is your Transportation Bureau, Water, and Environmental Services, which is stormwater and sewage. And so the new form of government that we're moving to separates the legislative powers of a commissioner from the sort of, I guess, semi-executive authority of actually managing bureaus for the city. And so as a part of that process, we are moving those over to be run by, let's say, qualified technocrats, I guess you'd call them. So people who are deeply qualified to be managing these service areas. And so right now, the official sort of operating roadmap for this new form of government has the CBPA in the same service area as Portland Police. And the members of the PAC bring up, I think, a fairly reasonable question as to why, if this is a process of employer versus employee, why that wouldn't live in the same sort of bucket as human resources. So I think we can absolutely have that discussion with our commissioners.
So it sounds like that's something that's been heard and agreed with. Yeah? Okay, so next.
The concern is that the fact that you haven't already thought about.
I'm aware of that, thank you. You're going to need to wait, thanks for the, so back to, because we really want to try to get through, there's a lot of information here. So the next slide, the city decided the specifics of who should be on the nominating committee, but cut out scores of provisions the PAC inserted. The new charter, for example, sets the limit on financial matters before city council at $50,000, a limit that's currently $5,000. What criteria did the city use to decide what details are appropriate for code or not?
Judith, we were hoping to answer questions 9 and 10. We read them as related, so we're hoping to read question 10 as well.
Okay.
And answer them together.
That sounds great.
Awesome. Thank you. So there's 10.
Okay, the city code as proposed by the PAC includes proposals that were taken out with the explanation that they are more appropriate for administrative rules. This leaves the new board with a huge assignment at the beginning, delaying the important work of police accountability while they determine many of these rules. Is there a specific reason why this would be preferable?
So I think first of all, remembering that the council is appointing the board. So at the end of the day, the nominating committee can make recommendations, but the council is appointing the board. And the nominating committee is made up of 2 community members for every 1 police member. So we have 9 members on the nominating committee, 2 community members, 1 police member, 9 total. And I think that for the nominating committee, because the council is going to make decisions as to who's going to be on the board, then it makes sense to have in the code. The question was like, why is that in code? I think was the question when we didn't put other things into code. And that was included in code because council's the one that's going to be making the appointments to the board. So it made sense for that to be in city code. I think that on the other piece, that there was a real interest in providing that framework, and as I said at the beginning, where you have your charters, your constitution, and your code is like your state law, and then your administrative rules are next, and then your policies are at the bottom as far as fleshing out details. And we wanted to leave some flexibility to that board to make some of these decisions as far as how are they going to run and how do things work, and also especially as a startup office, as a new board, as a new entity at the city, to have some greater flexibility on being able to adapt and change things as they see fit. If things are in code, takes a little bit longer to change things and a little bit longer to adopt them and make changes. And so that's why I think we took a number of your suggestions and we sent those out to the former PAC members. A list of all the things that we felt would be appropriate, and asked council to then recommend that on to the board for consideration to put into either a rule or a policy. So it wasn't ignoring that. That was about 1/3 of what you had recommended was being referred over to them. And so I think, but keeping that flexibility for that board to make decisions more quickly and adapt especially as a new board, we felt was important.
Thank you, Heidi. Jay, did that answer your question? Jay has made comments in the chat.
No, and so I was going to ask the question out loud, because the question is not about the code. It feels like it's deflecting to say that it was about the code. The question is about why the decision was made to give the board an immediately huge task of creating basically the entire rules of the system they're in, while they're also supposed to be doing the task of actually doing police accountability. Why do you think that they can do both sufficiently well? Like, what is your reasoning around giving them this enormous endeavor immediately upon starting a whole new system that is, already going to, probably have its hiccups? So, it would be good to have some kind of skeleton based on the community's input. Because we all know, as you said, the council can go back to council and change anything. And if they don't like any of the rules, they can go back and change it. But the question is why the huge workload immediately onto the PAC of building the plane as they're flying?
Well, I think that our thinking about it was when you put something in code, it's equivalent to putting it in state law for the city, because that's the same level. And that is not as easy to go back and change and make amendments to that. And so we took several of your recommendations and put them into that group to be sent over to the board. So it's not to say that we're just ignoring what you recommended, but we took a third of that and said, hey, council, let's refer this over to the board, and they can go through and decide to adopt that and put that into their rules and say, yes, this is the way we want to do it. But providing some flexibility to that board to decide, how do we want to set up our processes, looking at all the good work that you did. None of your work is going to waste. They'll get all that information. But to leave them some flexibility to make some decisions about how they want to run the board and how they want to make it, and to be able to adopt things by rule, so that, and if they then are going along a little bit and say, no, this didn't work very well, I think that leaves them that flexibility to change it more quickly than if they have to come back to council. So it's just a little bit longer process, and so we just looked at that being more nimble and more flexible for them to create the board that they feel is appropriate, with all the recommendations that the PAC gave. They have all that information.
Thank you, Heidi. We have questions from PAC members, comment?
Thank you. My name is Sophia Glenn. I'm a PAC member and a co-chair for the first phase. My question, hearing what you're saying as to not the reasons why you didn't put those into code, those items into code, based on the fact that it would be hard to change. But previously you were saying that the board can go to city council and change things very easily. So now you're saying it's going to be difficult for them to change it from the beginning. So I'm kind of confused on what's easy and what's difficult, and why is that? Because you're saying it's easy to change code and just go to the city or to the commissioners, and now you're saying, oh, now it's going to be too difficult to go to the city commissioners.
I think to set up a process, I mean, as I said, you go down this upside down or an upside down funnel of how you fill in and flesh out how things work. And you start with your constitution, and then you have which is our charter, and then you have your code language. And generally your code language is filling out some of that constitution, but it's not everything in there. You want to leave some of that down below so that a bureau, an office, whoever can make decisions about how they should run and what they should do. So I think getting the jurisdiction is not so challenging, because charter says, council, you have to make that change. So getting that before them is one thing. But taking other changes where there could be debates about it and different thoughts about whether those should or should not be changed. So on the jurisdiction piece, you can do an emergency ordinance. Council has to adopt those changes, and it can happen pretty quickly. But when you're talking about changing code, about process, that can be much more involved. And I think we were thinking, let's keep this funnel of how laws normally work and how rulemaking in jurisdictions normally work, and maintain that, and not have it be at the top here small, which is our charter, and then have it huge here at that second level, and then have it small underneath that. To us, that didn't make sense. It made more sense to go in that funnel, put some parameters around that at the second level, which is the code, and then leave some flexibility down below.
So was that to make it easier on the board, or was it to be made easier for the commission? That decision to not put it in there?
Wait, I'm sorry, commission or council?
Council, I'm sorry.
Okay, no, I just want to make sure I'm understanding your question correctly. I don't know if it's easier, but more, allowing that board to make their own decisions and to look at how do they want to set it up, what makes sense to them about how this oversight process should work. Giving them some latitude and flexibility and respect to say, okay, you have some great ideas. Here's all these great ideas. Look through them and figure out what works for you.
So we've got, oh, I'm sorry.
One more thing. I just wanted to say I'm with Ms. Ajay, who spoke earlier about the question. I have to say, having been on the board, as the co-chair and as a member of the commission, it takes a lot of time, and not having that pre-done will be a huge burden on the new board, and I just think it's an undue burden that they shouldn't have to do. They could change it, but it's been 2 years. You've got a group of 20 people. I'm hoping that we go back to the 33 for the board. It's going to be a lot of work. There's a lot of people, and it's all volunteer, and we really wanted to make this board successful as much as possible. So I would just implore you all to put those back into code, because it's going to really be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, and I see a lot of agreement in head nodding and also online. So Faith and then Tim, please, from online.
Yeah, I'll just be really brief and echo what Sophia and Ajay have said. I mean, I think you have seen how laborious and intensive and how much the community cares about this topic. Even tonight's meeting, and we're on question 10. So this reflects the meetings that we had over 2 years. So to come to agreement among 20 community members to send you recommendations unanimously means that we asked the questions, we did the research. And so to ask a new set of volunteers to make decisions based on community-informed decision-making is frankly insulting. Like, I will continue to say this to you. I am a city employee too. This is worst practice in community engagement. And so what you're modeling is community engagement that doesn't matter. Like, I appreciate the legal advice that you're giving, but what you're saying is all the considerations and all the time that we came to consensus to bring you a unanimous recommendation. I don't know if you remember Charter Commission, they had so many people drop off. They didn't send you something unanimously. We send you something unanimously. So to ask a new board to then redo what we did and to make the assumption that new members who are also going to be appointed by council will come up with something different. We were all appointed by council. These are the people that you selected. So it is, again, I'm going to say it, it's egregious.
I mean, the one thing to keep in mind, though, is that this isn't saying all that information is available to the board. It doesn't mean that they can, I guess I just disagree that it's gone to waste. I think all your time and your effort is there and reflected. Just because it's narrowed down and it's given to the board, I mean, that doesn't change all that work and that information that they have before them to consider.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, Heidi, that this is not starting over from zero. So what didn't end up in code, I think they said earlier, is retained in a document that absolutely can be presented to this board. And a lot of that retains your language in very close to its original form. And so as quickly as we can move policy through, this new board can look at this document presented and say, these will be it wouldn't be bylaws, they would be.
What is the original form that we speak of?
That would be the original language that the PAC presented to council.
Is that constitution, is the original form, or?
So,
No.
so this is the work of the PAC was to present a recommendation in the form of a code document, and that's what we're here discussing tonight. And so some things that didn't end up in the final document that was approved by City Council is what I was discussing just there. And so they've been retained, and they will be presented to the board in the form of essentially a separate document. And so just because it didn't end up in code language does not mean that this board does not have the ability to retain that.
Thanks, Jackson. Tim?
Yeah, thank you, Tim Pitts, he, him pronouns, former PAC member. And just to briefly reiterate that I appreciate the funnel and the need to have the charter lead to the code, to the rules, but we had countless conversations about what we should include as things that would be into code versus things that the committee would figure out later on, or that the board would figure out later on. And we put the important things in based on the 2 years of work with the community. And so it definitely feels like now what you're trying to do is insert the police into the nominating process heavily. You say 1/3 is not a lot, but never did the community ask for the police to be involved in the nomination process for the board. So you're going to put police into 1/3 of the people nominating the people to the board, and you're going to provide the board with all of the flexibility in the world to figure out what to do. And that just seems like it is a complete slap in the face to the community, who have told us over 2 years what the board should be doing. So it doesn't make sense. You keep referencing Commissioner Hardesty, former Commissioner Hardesty, trying to rein us in, as you've said. But what I heard Commissioner Hardesty say was that she suggested we have a unanimous vote on our final package to present to you, because that would make it really unified and show that we had really incorporated all the community's feedback. And we had all 20 people, from small business owners to people from marginalized communities, all across the board representing the whole city. And we all came together and figured that this was the perfect solution to what we were asked to do. So this whole meeting just seems like you telling us we're going to let the board figure it out because that's just the way the funnel works, and that's not how it should work to us.
Thank you, Tim. We have a suggestion of trying to get through the next group of questions as a larger group. We're going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to ask Samir if you would read the questions so that we can just get through them and get a new voice happening.
We have another question.
Thank you.
Do you want to do 11 before we get to the next category first?
Oh, okay, so 11, I'm sorry, and then the next category we're going to run through. The Community Board on Police Accountability was designed to have independent legal counsel so as to keep and protect its independence and provide another form of accountability for the community. What is the reason for removing this power and assigning the city attorney to assist or even lead the board in case reviews, arbitration, and at the Civil Service Board? How does this relate to the way the city auditor and the Board of Prosper Portland can hire independent counsel and the related code charter provisions?
I think just really briefly, no power was taken away. The city proposal provides for that authority. I think that the analogy of the city auditor and Portland Prosper, in city charter, it says that they will have legal counsel, so that's right in the charter. What we just put in there in code was that they'll just go through the normal process to get independent legal counsel.
Okay, maybe that wasn't clear in how it came out. All right, we're going to get through the next group.
Really
Oh,
fast,
yeah.
there was something in there about why would the city attorney assist or even lead the board in case reviews? There's nowhere that we're leading in case reviews. We're there, our office is there to answer questions because we're going to handle the case on the back end. It's the same thing we do citywide on investigation disciplinary matters. Because of that risk that something might go to arbitration, we're advising up front. This is citywide. So we're just there available to provide our information that we have to them, but we're not leading in any way.
Great, thank you, Heidi, for that. All right, and we have one person waiting. Thank you for that. Samir, can you read through the next set of questions?
Thank you, and these all relate to board qualification, size, and functions, and they're questions 12 through 17 in the document. One is, why did the city remove the Office of Community and Civic Life policy that says requirements for advisory board members include people who, quote, play, attend school or worship, end quote, in Portland, in favor of the older, more restrictive criteria that people must live or work in Portland? 13, why was houselessness removed as a potential qualification for board members? 14, the city has proposed cutting the board down from 33 to 21 members based on the caseload over a certain number of years. PAC based the board size on the number of complaints that were reported prior to the ballot measure passing. Can you share your data and your thinking on this idea publicly? Question 15, what is the legal definition of the term, quote, majority consensus, end quote, and that's used in 35D.060, Part D2. 16, in addition to redacting names in the periodic public reports, will other content also be redacted? And finally, 17, the PAC proposed a value of continuous improvement for the new system. Why did the city remove the requirement for an outside expert review of the new oversight system after it has been in place for a period of time?
So I'm happy to take question 12, which asked about why this would be treated differently than standards for volunteer bodies from the Office of Civic Life. And the big difference is that this is not an advisory body. This is a governing body. This is a body that is making final determinations, and so they're not exactly the same as an advisory body. Advisory bodies don't make final decisions, but this board will. So they have a unique status and different forms to govern how they do that work. So the civic life stuff just is a little bit different for that body than it is for what a governing body would be.
And I would just note that too, in looking at other jurisdictions, their requirements for their governing board members are even narrower. So they have just must live in the city or the jurisdiction, and so we had live or work. So it's a little bit different, but more expansive than other jurisdictions.
Anyone want to take 13?
I think on a houselessness, we just said that the council is free to consider a variety of factors and experiences from applicants that they feel will add value, including houselessness. We just didn't require it in code. We required in code what the charter language said.
Board size?
So on the board size, what we did is that we took a period of 12 years, the data that was provided to us by both IPR and IA, and based on that, we saw 240 complaints a year, and that included years with heavy cases, which is what I think a lot of folks are thinking, that this board is going to have a higher caseload than normally IPR does because of the jurisdictional expansion. So we took a look at the years where we had the highest level of numbers, and even including those years, over the past 12 years, there were 70 cases annually, including deadly force cases. So this city proposal includes a 3-member panel meeting approximately 3 times per complaint. And with 21 members, each member will hear roughly 10 cases a year, plus the deadly force cases will be heard by the full CBPA board. So we took that as a, as the first count of it. I do think that the PAC numbers that I saw in the report were a little bit not based on the data that we were receiving from these bodies. So we took that determination and also heard from other folks with board member experience related to having 33 members versus 21 members. And that seemed to be like a little bit more manageable for staff.
Thank you. Next.
Yes, so the legal definition of the term majority consensus. So the concept consensus comes from the public meetings law, where it talks about what type of actions a governing body can take in executive session. And in executive session, a governing body can deliberate, and they can also reach consensus, informal, like general agreement about what steps should be taken, but they can't make their final decision. That has to happen in an open public meeting. And so in that particular portion of the code, as we're looking at how will that concept of consensus play out in CBPA reviews, we also added the term majority, meaning more than half, because the CBPA is making those decisions by, their final decisions by a majority, and so it seemed that it was appropriate that it would also apply to consensus when they're reaching consensus on next steps in executive sessions.
Okay.
Now, you getting all this because you guys didn't do none of this before?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, yeah.
No,
Are you getting all this information that you're implementing now because you guys didn't do this prior?
that's not necessarily the case, so we'll get to, we're just,
I got a daughter that's 25, I missed 20 years of her life, okay? Tormented and tortured, this ain't no joke.
No, I don't think it is, but I'm asking you to respect everyone else's time. We're going to, okay, and this is why the process, that's why we're in a process. That's why we're in the process, so that we can make these improvements. And I know it's very frustrating. I get that. So
No excessive force is going on. You're doing the right thing, ain't hard.
we got that. So I'm going to ask you to stop now, please. Thank you. And is there anything else on the slides? If so, let's clip through. Did we get the last one on the redaction of names?
Yeah, I can speak to 16.
Thank you.
So any protection of complainants and covered employees, their names, private information will be consistent with the requirements of Oregon meeting laws. And so in personnel proceedings, it will be anonymized and alleged allegations will be referred to by a number. So similarly, there have been other incidences in the city where there are employees who've been doxxed online, information's been released online, and the city has worked with them to do erase me accounts and make sure their information does not get shared. So we intend to have the same policies move forward in this board as well.
Thanks. And the last one, I think there was one more. I don't know. Did we read that?
Yeah.
This is the last one. Okay.
And I think we left in that I don't think we said that they can't do this. We just said that it's up to the board to decide. This will be part of the information that's sent over, a recommendation to the board to decide, do you want to have regular audits? How often do you want to have them? And all that kind of information. It's not that it's a perfectly good idea for an entity to do reviews of their work.
Okay, so I've got 3 PAC members with their hands up, and I really, really want to leave some time for community members who've been incredibly patient. So if you can make it very brief, I think obviously this isn't done. There'll need to be more conversation. Casey. Yes, you. Oh, yep, microphone right here.
Testing. All right, we're good. So I want to start by saying, and I feel like we've just not had the opportunity to really say this, I don't hate everything that you guys did. I think that a lot of the changes that you made were very trying to take what we were attempting to do and say,
Here's how we think you can implement that better. And I think in some cases, I looked at it and I was like, oh, that actually is better. Thank you. And in some cases, I was like,
thank you very much. In some cases, I was like, oh, well, that's fine. Yeah, I don't see any problem with that. In some cases, I was like, I think our way was better, but honestly, reasonable minds can disagree about how to implement this. But I think you're getting at trying to do what we were trying to do, but in the same way. I think the reason why you have this board of 20 volunteers who are all unhappy with how their work has been taken and worked on is that there were some very specific changes that feel like they were not in the spirit of trying to do what the original charter amendment was doing and not in the spirit of implementing what we were trying to implement. The thing that felt the most to me like that was the nominating board. This is something that was nowhere in the charter. It was nowhere in any of our discussions. This is something that if any of you or any of your bosses felt like it was an important aspect of this, you could have come to the PAC at any time and we could have had that public discussion. But it didn't happen in public, and it's hard to not feel like that was on purpose, because this is something that nobody wanted to have a public discussion on. They wanted to just sort of push it in at the last minute. Suddenly the people who are on this independent board are only even ending up in front of city council if they're approved by this nominating committee that never existed. That we had someone who testified at city council who had worked in state government, who had never heard of anything like this, of somebody nominating a board to nominate the board. Suddenly we have this extra check on making sure that there aren't any undesirable people on the new board. And as someone who's been working on this current board, who was appointed to the board unanimously by city council, as all of us were, including Mayor Wheeler, who has subsequently been portrayed as anti-police by Mayor Wheeler, as I have put a significant amount of my time and effort into putting together a very fair board, as all of us have. It feels like this is an effort to fundamentally undermine the work of the board. And that is what is so frustrating, is that I feel like there is no reason for, I mean, I don't think any of us here are and are so passionate about what was done to this because we think that you should have adopted every single word that we submitted and that we think that our idea was the best idea possible. But it feels like if you had really believed in the ideas that you have added to this that fundamentally change the nature of it, you would have had them be a part of the public process rather than trying to shove them into this package at the last minute and push it through. And so it's really hard to have good faith towards a lot of these other ideas that feel like they may in fact be good faith ideas when there are these fundamentally these concepts that fundamentally alter the character of what we're trying to do, that you did not have the good faith to come to us and to come to the public and have any kind of discussion around them.
Thank you. And I've got Dan, not yet, we're almost there. Dan and Debbie, and then we're going into the open public process. I'm sorry, thank you. I apologize. You next. Yes.
Wesley. I'm a former Police Accountability Commissioner. I'm a tribal member of the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde on this indigenous land. And I was also the chairperson on the Police Accountability section of the Police Accountability Commission. And yeah, I agree. All these changes that you all have come up with were made without talking to any of us. And that's just unfathomable. Without discussing 2 years of work that we put in our heart, soul, and minds, and sweat and tears. Since you so obviously ignored my voice, and I'm talking about the council and Ted Wheeler and all y'all that represent them, my voice, my broken heart, my wounded soul, my re-traumatizing public testimony for decades of excessive lived experience, which also reflects the multitudes of community voices who plead for police accountability. It is blatantly evident you not only dismiss the gift of our voices, but that you hold the Community Board for Police Accountability Oversight System and our demands in contempt before consideration as reflected by shedding it to support your pro-cop bias and the assumption that my voice and those I speak up for are anti-cop. Let me make it perfectly clear. I'm in favor of and have been constantly reminding folks of the values of anti-racism, equity, inclusion, and community, yet I've been perceived to be anti-cop. That requires you all to do some reflection. What does that mean? You think of cops if you think promoting anti-racism, equity, inclusion, and community to be anti-cop? I am anti-community leaders who don't support a policing oversight system that would show some respect for their communities, that need strong, just, fair, honest treatment and leadership, and at the very least attempt to adhere to the city core values. Have you read those lately? Do you even know where to find them? Do you know what they are? They're anti-racism, actions to dismantle institutional and systemic racism, will be the responsibility of every employee. Equity, we acknowledge Oregon's history of exclusion and are dedicated to rebuilding trust through reconciliation and restorative justice. Portland, Oregon, being the first city in the United States to adopt an open data policy, leads the nation in developing a culture of information sharing. Trust is established and maintained through integrity and inclusion. Communication serves as a catalyst for transformative change. And collaboration. All behaviors, actions, decisions, and systems shall reflect a culture of accountability and commitment to the city's core values. Commitment to city's core values. I don't see this in any of the things you've changed in this new system that we created that centers community. And community values addressing inequities and transparency. Who signed this? Who signed off on this? Be it further resolved that the resolution is binding city policy. Mayor Ted Wheeler and the rest of you. The amendments and changes you all approved not only egregiously go against those core city values, but the fact that you don't recognize that is more proof you maintain the white supremacy construct in the city council despite looking diverse. And those changes also attempt to continue allowing the influence of police to police, which is in no way accountable and further devalues the community and shows evidence that our lives still do not matter to you. One more thing, we are not stuck in 2020. We are stuck in a hopeful future. And that's what we that's why we created the CBPA like this, for a more hopeful future, and you all just tore it apart. I'm ashamed that I voted for every single one of those city councils in TED. I was under the impression that a Democratic leader was a leader for the people. I was so misled. I don't know what else to say. I'm just...
Thank you for your comments. Okay, Dan and Debbie, we have very little time left. The communities had no time to talk. I want to stop for a minute here and just acknowledge a lot of people showed up who weren't on the PAC, and they have been asked to wait the whole time. So we just have to decide what we're going to do, because there's only 10 minutes left. And so if PAC members feel they need to keep commenting, then that means we're going to eliminate the opportunity for the community. It's just where we are. That's the math. But got it. No, please, no. We're really trying to. Please.
I'm not okay.
Okay, fine. Then.
I'm a person too.
Nobody is doubting that. Nobody is doubting that. No one is doubting it. I'm not.
But I have every right to have spent 20 years with my daughter.
You.
I have every right to have had my mom who's my best friend.
You do, but you know what?
Okay, while everybody else has their mom, their children, I was taken from that because of a stinger.
I do
I'm not okay with that.
Sir, can you and I talk privately after? I'll spend time talking with you. Absolutely.
That's important.
Yeah,
They're important
I'm happy
to
to
me.
do it. I'm happy to do it. We'll talk after the meeting's over so that we can be
My
sure.
daughter, I lost my mother, my daughter, 20 years of my life.
Let's spend some time talking, okay?
So let's go ahead, please, with we've got online, we have Dan and Debbie, and then we have here, so, okay. If none of them are ceding their time, then I'm sorry, we're gonna figure something else out. I'm really sorry for how much hurt you have. Go ahead, Dan.
All right, so my 30 seconds. You said the size of the board is too big for staff to manage. The staff is going to be very large, $12 million budget, not a problem. You wanted all the board to participate in the deadly force cases. Those are 1,000-page plus files. We said more than 5 people, which was the original size of the panels, which could be 7, which is who reviews deadly force cases now. You should not make all 21 people read those case files at one time. Thank you.
Debbie, go ahead.
Yes, so I just want to say, I feel like there's more to say between the city and the PAC, and I'd like to recommend that we have a second meeting to continue with this discussion. And I know there's concern about missing the DOJ deadline. However, you know, we have seen them in the past allow the city to go past its deadlines. And I think in this case, they might be supportive of continuing the conversation between the PAC and the city so that we can come to possibly a more positive resolution than where we are right now. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Debbie.
This is Sophia Glenn, and I just wanted to acknowledge our community members who have felt pain associated with police accountability. I know in all of our meetings we've had people, and I think that there should be a means for them to be able to express that. I know in the last meeting when this code was adopted, there was another individual who was feeling a great deal of pain, and I felt that one of the commissioners walked out, and I thought that was very shameful. I agree that they probably did not want to hear, but to feel for the commissioners, the city commissioners, to feel the pain of the community is very important. And I felt like it's been dismissed in very often in many cases. And this is why we spent so many hours and days of our lives arduously going through this, trying to come up with a true consensus from all the 20 commissioners, because we all have experienced something that it's been very painful for us to continue to go through. And as we have gone through all of these code recommendations, they came from real experiences from members on the commission. So I want you all to understand that we're not just upset about you're not taking it word for word. We're upset that it's not been acknowledged how deeply this work has been for us, and how touching. If you didn't know, I lost my brother to police violence, and I can't get that out of my mind. I can't get it out of my mind. And I'm fighting for my niece, which was his daughter. So I understand this gentleman here. And I want him to know that people are on this board who have had these experiences, and we had to obey with all the rules of law that didn't allow us to even do the things that we really want to do. Because we can't. Our hands are tied by law. And so I just want you to understand that the members have taken this very seriously. I'm not sure what the city commissioners are thinking, but I will say that we have done our best, and I'm telling you, we did not agree on everything. I'm just gonna laugh about it because we didn't. You've got 20 people with 20 different experiences and 20 different ideas. And to come up with this was extremely difficult. And I hear city council saying that they understand, but I don't think so. I really don't. So I will stop here. I did have a question about the 33 members reduction. I won't go into that. I would just say I don't see any reason why you couldn't leave it at 33. I listened to the reasonings, and they really didn't make here or there. They were just numbers you pulled out. And if you can pull those out, you could just leave it the way it is. So I will stop here and
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Okay, so I see we've got a hand up back there, right back there, and then to you, sir. Thank you, and then to the gentleman with the cap. So back to that. Yep.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me? Yeah, great. Great. My name is Alan Combs, pronouns he, him. I've lived and worked in Portland for over 22 years. I'll be brief. I think there are other people in this room who are probably have comments that actually, if anything, support the changes staff made and were adopted by the commission back on November 15th. So I just want to acknowledge that not everybody may get to speak, but I'll just make a few comments while I can. I am also acutely aware of the need to eliminate systemic racism and biases in our community, and getting that right with law enforcement is of the highest importance. But Portland remains in crisis on many fronts, including public safety. I could recite many statistics, but the homicide rate in the month of October was 10. And we're trending towards another year of 90 homicides in the city. Thus, I recommend proceeding in a manner with the Accountability Commission that does not impede our ability to restore public safety resources, including police officers. Within the budget being discussed tonight, I generally supported the changes made by staff. I already pointed that out. But I have a few specific comments since you made this meeting available to us. First of all, regarding the budget, which is approximately $12.5 million a year, a budget that was pointed out by the PAC being larger than the IPR and internal affairs combined, CPBA should be required to have a separate budget advisory committee to oversee their budget discretions. This was one item that was taken out of the PAC recommendation by the city, and I'm not sure if that's because it's goes without saying in other city requirements, but I do think a separate advisory committee on the budget should be needed. I think seeing things like this, once the truth is revealed, we'll take certain things back to the voters, like maybe we don't need 5% of the budget for the accountability board. In terms of adopted criteria for being a member of the CPBA, I believe it's reasonable to have a criteria against express bias for or against law enforcement. In any event, the PAC's criteria, frankly, I didn't think would pass law enforcement, or judicial review, so I think it needed to be cleaned up in any event. I support the adopted ordinance criteria for a nominating committee. It's not unusual to have a separate nominating committee from the actual operating board. The PAC's recommendation was that any nominations would be done at the CPBA's discretion. I don't think that's specific enough.
Can you
I will
make
note
it a
that the
little
internal
faster?
All right.
I have a bunch of other people waiting.
All right, all right. I will provide specific comments, but I just want to make it clear that there's definitely a diversity of views being heard, and I hope that they are reviewed by the city staff as you go forward with the DOJ. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And so now we have this gentleman.
Thank you. It was mentioned that I'm not on the PAC, so I will say who I am. My name is Dr. Matthew J. Levine. I'm a scholar of racial justice and a racial justice activist and a racial justice facilitator. And I've dedicated my life to that work because I believe in increasing love in the world and reducing harm. And in line with that, I'm here to demand that the City Council and City Attorney immediately change all the revisions they made to the Police Accountability Commission proposals back to what they were when proposed from the PAC. And if the City Council and the Mayor cannot do that, I ask that each one of them resign effective immediately. This may seem a significant ask, but as we heard from Commissioner Michelle Westley at the last council meeting about the PAC, the decisions being made here are life and death, and the City Council has been completely unwilling to recognize that fact. I've already tried to share before how the changes you've made are racist, how they will disproportionately negatively impact the lives of Black, Indigenous, and people of color Portlanders. I've already tried to share how the changes you've made are anti-democratic. They're very clearly against the will of your constituents and try to remove power from the community. So the last thing I'll try to do is appeal to the fact that even if the council members don't care about the Portland community, they might care about their own legacy. So Mayor Wheeler, you're about to go down in history as one of the most racist politicians in the history of an already unbelievably racist country. To see this, let me talk a bit about history. Those of us familiar with the history of the civil rights movement know that it wasn't Southern white conservatives that killed the momentum of the civil rights movement. It was actually Northern white liberals that killed the civil rights movement when it moved from Alabama to a focus on Chicago with the Chicago Freedom Movement. We don't hear much about that today because
30
there were no real
seconds.
victories in Chicago like there were victories in the South. Rather, Northern white liberals led by Democratic Mayor Richard J. Daley show that there's unfortunately a lot of wisdom in saying that a liberal is someone who is in favor of all rights movements except any of the movements happening right now. Don't let Portland be a repeat of Chicago. Don't let Portland be the place that the Black Lives Matter movement came to die.
Thank
And
you.
wake up. The DOJ said that this city is racist as fuck. Do you know how fucked up
Okay,
it has
so,
to be for the DOJ to say you're oppressive?
So thank you so much for your comments. So people have agreed, and we're just checking with facilities to go another 15 minutes, but only for community comment. Okay, and I want to remind anyone who's speaking in community that you have a lot of other community people here been waiting, and if you can keep your things brief. So the gentleman in the black cap, and then the woman over here with the black glasses and the blonde hair, and then over to the great earrings person. Sorry, I don't know your name.
Thank you. I'm Tim Larson. I'm a resident of Portland since 1949. Certainly glad to hear that you rely on the Department of Justice for their expertise and knowledge. The Department of Justice published a couple of years ago a report after looking at all of the existing police accountability commissions across the United States, found absolutely no empirical evidence whatsoever that these commissions work to reduce police malfeasance or to improve community relations. None. All these people out there are doing this as an exercise of their own belief systems and are not actually producing anything of value to their communities, according to the Department of Justice. A lot of people we all kind of travel in different circles, and I can see faces in here that I know from some of those circles. I have a unique advantage to cross over circles because I'm a Lyft driver a few nights a week, and I have people placed into my car, and lots of times along the way we have conversations, and because I'm this little tiny guy and I'm really nice, people will talk to me about how they feel, and I break the rules all the time because you're not supposed to talk about politics. But I would like to let everyone on the commission know that in my circle of friends and all of the people that I've talked to driving Lyft and Uber, I have no one felt that any good came out of the work that you did, and that the board was anti-police from the very beginning and stacked with people who had volunteered from their various communities because they were against the police as opposed to wanting to improve the life safety of every Portlander, which is the
30 seconds.
Which is the task that we ask the police to do. And we ask them to go out and talk to people who we personally would never face, people who we never would want to have anything to do with. We send the police out to talk to those people when they are endangering our lives, when they're hurting ourselves or our children, when they're smashing people over the head with rocks, like the nurse that was jogging and the little Hispanic lady who I gave a ride to in my car, who had actually also been hit in the head with a rock by the same homeless individual.
Okay, let's start wrapping up. Thank you.
All right. To wrap up, having a police accountability commission without police presence on it makes no more sense than having a board of medical examiners with no doctors.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we've got here and then over here.
You do, sorry. My name is Tiana Tozer, and I'm a member of the minority and I just want to say I'm a member of the people with disabilities minority. And the DOJ, the lawsuit against the city, the only vulnerability that was mentioned was how the police were handling people with mental illness. Since 2003, 50% of police shootings have been people with mental illness, and yet people here have hijacked this into a race issue. And that changes the narrative, and I am really tired of the false narrative. And I want to say to you, thank you. You did hear us in the community. I was paid to participate in the feedback. I got $200. They didn't want my feedback. None of my comments made it into the final report. The questions they asked were ridiculous because they were just looking for me to approve what they had already done. I find it truly egregious that the PAC is so up in arms about these recommendations, because that's what they are. They're recommendations. I didn't vote for any of these people. I voted for the city council. They're the people I expect to represent me. And I feel that you heard our concerns as a community that this PAC was biased and that it was not transparent, and that this will not help the majority of Portlanders and will be subject to more violence if this PAC goes through the way they did it. So I want to thank you for your thoughtful consideration of the recommendations, and maybe I'm confused about what that word means, but truly it's been a little bit distressing to hear the PAC talk about this as a sacred cow, because it seems very undemocratic. So thank you for your thoughtful considerations. I'm not perfectly happy with the changes that are made, but that means it's probably good policy if nobody's happy. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Now, before we have this last comment, I got to say the facilities has to close this building down at 8:30 sharp. And our friends from Open Signal need to be able to pack their stuff and get out. So we're taking one more comment, a very quick next steps, and then we all have to get out as quickly as possible. Thank you.
I have plenty to say. I'm going to limit it. I have 4 bullet points. One on the flow sheet. At the top, the liaison piece, I think is crucially important to anybody who interacts with this system. Coming in, everybody hasn't attended these meetings, so they don't even know what this means. So having a liaison at the top, file a complaint, have a liaison that helps you through the process, whoever that works for. Number 12, there was a question about people being able to be a part of the committee if they were outside of Portland. We know the history of Portland. We're intentionally blocking out certain folks who've been priced out. They've lived here their whole lives. Now they can't afford to live in Portland, but they still go to church in Portland. They still bring their children all the way across the town so they can go to the same school they graduated from and their grandparents graduated from. So we're intentionally pushing certain people out of the conversation. Let's be real about that. And then the other thing about the nominating committee, also, I was really confused because I've been watching this process and I was kind of blindsided by that. That's why I went back to my original question was who, how, why? And I still feel like there's some work that needs to be done there. I agree. Please allow time for you to, the PAC and you all to go back to the table, finish out this conversation. It's a marathon, not a sprint. It's helping no one to rush it.
Thank you so much for your comments. Okay, Stephanie, a really quick, what next steps?
Yeah, no, I thank you, everyone. Honestly, this has been dialogue, which is a nice change from speaking at city council over each other and not getting too engaged. So I really, really appreciate that. We have a lot to talk about. We have a lot to update our bosses on. And so we will go back to them. I think there's a lot of great feedback that we received. And so we will regroup and then we can reach out with what next steps look like. As it sits right now, public comment remains open until December 15th. So that, oops, we don't have it on the screen. Heidi put that in the chat. It's DOJ-comments@portlandoregon.gov, We welcome all of them. We've gotten a ton of feedback and lots of different perspectives, but that email goes automatically to all of us here so that there's nobody gatekeeping who gets that information. That goes to everyone. So I think with that, we can provide an update once we've had a chance to talk with our bosses, but I think I can speak for everyone when I say thank you. Oh, do you have something else, Heidi?
No.
Oh, sorry. Thank you.
well.
Thank you. We really do appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for being here. Hey, thanks.